The Roman surgeon's hands shook, not from fear of the battlefield, but from the wound before him, an injury so horrific it seemed to mock the very might of the empire. Blood pooled like dark rivers across the canvas of torn flesh, while the cries of soldiers faded into a deafening silence. Every heartbeat echoed in the surgeon's chest as he faced a choice: act or watch a life slip into eternity. In that tent, beneath the flickering torchlight, skill alone would not save him. Only courage and the trembling hands of a man confronting death itself. The air outside the surgeon's tent was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smoke of burning fields. Horses neighed in panic, their hooves striking against the earth slick with mud and blood, while distant cries of the wounded carried across the battlefield like ghosts of the fallen. Inside the tent, the surgeon adjusted the crude oil lamp, its flickering light casting shadows over his lined face and trembling hands. Each tool laid before him: a bone saw, forceps, and glass vials of bitter herbs, felt heavier than the weight of the empire itself. Today, he would face a wound that defied all reason, a mutilation so profound that even the most battle-hardened soldiers recoiled. Yet, in the chaos and fear, he found a singular focus: to wrest life from the jaws of death, knowing that every decision, every movement could mean salvation or catastrophe. The battlefield aftermath. Outside the tent, the battlefield lay in ruin, a grim testament to the brutality of Roman conquest. Splintered shields and shattered spears jutted from the churned mud, while the air trembled with the distant groans of dying men. The sun, a harsh, unrelenting glare, reflected off pools of blood, turning the earth into a grotesque mirror of suffering. Soldiers staggered, dragging shattered limbs or clutching deep gashes, their faces pale and slick with sweat. Some collapsed outright, their last breaths shallow and ragged, as medicis scurried between them, shouting instructions and offering crude remedies. The smell of iron and burnt flesh clung to every corner, infiltrating nostrils with an almost tangible weight. Through this chaos, the surgeon moved with grim determination, his robe darkened by fresh blood and mud, every step measured against the screams surrounding him. His assistants carried baskets of herbs, splints, and rudimentary tools, their hands shaking as they navigated the carnage. Horses stumbled through the wreckage, their panic-stricken whinnies echoing against the distant hills, mingling with the screams of those too young or too injured to comprehend the devastation. In that moment, the world shrank to the tent and the wound that awaited him. Everything else faded, leaving only the immediacy of survival, the cruel clarity of life and death, interwoven like threads in a tapestry soaked with blood. Every motion, every glance was haunted by the impermanence of flesh. The empire could conquer lands, erect monuments, and claim victories, but here, on this sodden battlefield, its power felt fragile, powerless against the sheer randomness of suffering. And it was within this chaos that the surgeon prepared himself, knowing the most gruesome wound of his life awaited just beyond the tent flap. The wound. The flap of the tent fell away like a curtain of doom, revealing the patient. He lay sprawled on the rough-hewn wooden table, a young centurion whose body had been shattered by a jagged iron spear. The wound was unlike anything the surgeon had ever seen. A gaping, irregular tear that cut through muscle, tore through sinew, and exposed fractured bone beneath. Blood streamed in thick rivulets, pooling across the coarse linen and soaking the medicuses. Hands, despite frantic efforts to staunch the flow, the air was heavy with the stench of iron and sweat, a visceral reminder that the line between life and death was thinner than the surgeon's trembling fingers. The centurion's eyes, wide and unfocused, reflected panic and pain. Yet there was trust, a fragile, desperate faith that this man, with hands now quivering, could pull him back from the edge. The surgeon inhaled sharply, tasting the copper tang of blood on his tongue as his fingers hovered over the wound. Every tool before him, the jagged bone saw, forceps, and tinctures of bitter herbs, suddenly seemed both indispensable and dangerously inadequate. He forced himself to focus, remembering the countless medici who had trained him, the crude diagrams etched in fading ink on scrolls, the whispered instructions of elder healers. This was no time for hesitation. One slip, one misjudged movement, and the spear's trajectory had already written the final verdict. With each heartbeat, the patient convulsed, tearing the thin straps that held him in place, and the tense shadows danced across torn flesh, amplifying the horror of the injury. Yet, even amidst the terror, the surgeon's mind sought clarity. He planned step by painstaking step to cleanse the wound with boiled water, apply herbal antiseptics, extract fragments of shattered bone, and attempt to realign sinew before the infection could claim its victory. The hands that trembled now gripped instruments as though they were extensions of his will, a battle not of sword and shield, but of precision, knowledge, and courage. In that moment, the Empire's might mattered little. All that remained was the fragile, flickering line between agony and survival. The surgeon's dilemma. The surgeon paused, hands hovering over the wound, feeling the pulse of life so painfully close to slipping away. Every motion carried weight beyond the flesh before him. Each decision could mean salvation or a premature grave. He knew the limits of Roman medicine, the absence of anesthesia, the crude instruments, the ever-present threat of infection. He could amputate, a final brutal solution, but it would strip the young centurion of an arm, leaving him alive but irrevocably changed. Or he could attempt the painstaking reconstruction, a delicate dance of muscle, sinew, and bone, relying on skill, instinct, and perhaps a fragment of luck. Outside, the distant thundering of cavalry faded to a low hum, leaving only the groans of the injured and the relentless ticking of time in the surgeon's ears. His assistants watched silently, faces pale, understanding the magnitude of the choice. To falter was to condemn. To act was to defy death itself. Sweat stung the surgeon's eyes as he considered the consequences. A failed procedure could cost the Empire a soldier, and in these times, every life was a pillar holding the weight of conquest. He muttered prayers under his breath, invoking gods and ancestors alike, seeking guidance that might not come. His mind raced, calculating angles, force, and the exact pressure required to set shattered bones without severing vital arteries. Fear clawed at him, threatening to paralyze his hands, yet determination surged in its place. This was more than skill. It was morality, bravery, and the understanding that history often remembered victories, but not the silent, unseen decisions that made them possible. With a deep, steadying breath, he made his choice, committing fully to the procedure that could either save a life or witness the empire's most promising soldier fall before his eyes. Ancient medicine in action. The surgeon's hands moved with grim precision, each motion measured against the rhythm of life and the looming specter of death. Boiled water hissed over the wound, steam curling into the dim tent light, carrying the bitter aroma of herbs dissolved within. With a forceps gripped tightly, he extracted splinters of shattered bone, each fragment a silent testament to the violence that had torn through flesh and armor alike. His assistants passed him strips of linen and poultices, their trembling fingers betraying their fear, yet unwavering in their devotion to the task at hand. Cauterization followed, the iron glowing red in the firelight before it kissed torn tissue, sealing vessels with a hiss that echoed like a muted scream. The centurion flinched, eyes wide, but remained alive, his trust anchored in the surgeon's skill. Herbs, bitter, pungent, and mysterious, were ground into a paste and applied meticulously, meant to staunch infection and encourage healing in a world before modern understanding of disease. The surgeon worked tirelessly, sweat pouring down his brow, mingling with the blood that stained his robe. Each sinew he realigned, every ligament he stitched, required not just knowledge, but a courage that bordered on recklessness. The Medici whispered instructions, reminding him of the patient's pulse, the slight tremor in his breath, the way his body reacted to pain. In those moments, the boundaries between life and death blurred. The empire's might, the legions, the banners, the victories carved into marble, felt distant, irrelevant. Here, in this small, blood-soaked tent, survival hinged not on conquest, but on hands that trembled, a mind sharpened by practice, and the courage to face a wound that could unmake a man entirely. Each action was a gamble, each decision a prayer, and each heartbeat a fragile victory against the inevitable. The emotional strain. The surgeon's hands were slick with blood, his robe clinging to his back as he bent over the patient. Yet the trembling persisted. It was not just fatigue, it was the weight of responsibility, pressing down with merciless intensity. Each groan from the centurion reverberated in his chest, echoing memories of failures long past, of lives lost despite desperate effort. The candlelight flickered, casting long windows, dancing shadows that seemed to twist the faces of his assistants into phantoms of fear. He could feel the pulse beneath his fingertips, fragile and erratic, a whisper of life that might vanish with the slightest miscalculation. Thoughts tumbled chaotically. What if his hand slipped? What if the wound defied all Roman knowledge? The knowledge that should have guided him now felt insufficient, fragile, as if the centuries of medicine were powerless against the raw brutality of flesh and bone. Prayer, whispered and trembling, became a ritual of survival. He muttered the names of gods long invoked by Medici, hoping their distant ears would lend strength. Sweat mingled with blood on his brow, stinging his eyes, yet he could not pause. Every assistant watched, every breath seemed magnified, every heartbeat a countdown. The tent, small and suffocating, became a crucible where courage, fear, and human frailty collided. In that silence, between cries and the hiss of cauterization, the surgeon understood a truth that no scroll could teach. To heal was to confront mortality, not only in others, but in oneself. His hands trembled, but the will to save burned fiercer, then the fear that gripped him. The turning point. The surgeon paused, inhaling sharply, as a shiver of realization ran down his spine. This was the moment upon which everything depended. The wound, deep and chaotic, had resisted his careful ministrations. Infection loomed, and every second wasted could steal the centurion's life. With trembling hands, he adjusted his grip on the forceps, realigning torn tissue and steadying the fractured bone. Each movement had to be perfect, each cut precise, as the line between salvation and tragedy narrowed to a razor's edge. The centurion's breath hitched, a shallow rasp that reverberated through the tent. The Medici exchanged anxious glances, aware that the next few minutes would determine the outcome. The surgeon's mind sharpened, instincts honed by countless previous battles guiding him. Even as fear gnawed at the edges of consciousness, he applied herbal salves, stitched sinew with painstaking care, and cauterized vessels that threatened to betray all his efforts. Then, a subtle shift. The pulse stabilized, the shallow gasp steadied, and the centurion's eyes, once wide with panic, began to focus. Relief mingled with exhaustion, a fragile triumph in a world defined by suffering. The turning point had passed. Life had not yet surrendered, but the battle for it was far from over. The aftermath and reflection. The immediate danger had passed, yet the tent remained a chamber of exhaustion and uneasy quiet. The surgeon stepped back, wiping blood from his hands onto the coarse linen, and allowed himself a fleeting moment to breathe. Around him, the centurion lay still, the ragged wound now stabilized, though his chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged relief. The Medici exchanged tired nods, their faces pale, but marked with the faintest glimmer of hope. Outside, the battlefield stretched like a scar across the earth, littered with bodies, broken weapons, and the hushed, painful groans of the survivors. The surgeon's eyes traced the horizon, where the banners of Rome fluttered faintly against the sun's glare. In that vast expanse of chaos, he recognized a bitter truth. The empire's victories were measured in miles of conquered territory and numbers of fallen foes. But the cost was human, raw, and intimate. He thought of the lives entrusted to him. Each pulse, each gasp, a reminder of the fragile line between triumph and tragedy. The surgeon's trembling hands had become instruments not of war, but of mercy and defiance, facing death with unwavering resolve. In this small, blood-stained tent, the grandeur of Rome faded, leaving only the quiet weight of human survival, courage, and the silent acknowledgement that sometimes the most heroic battles were fought not with swords, but with hands willing to save, even when fear threatened to undo them. The young centurion, still trembling but alive, was proof that skill, courage, and relentless determination could bend fate, if only for a moment. In a world defined by suffering and mortality, the legacy of the surgeon. Long after the blood had been tended, the herbs applied, and the tent emptied of its immediate chaos, the surgeon remained, seated on a rough wooden stool, staring at his trembling hands. Each scar, each callus, each minute quiver told a story of countless lives balanced on the edge of fate. In the quiet aftermath, he understood that history would remember emperors, legions, and conquests, but rarely, if ever, the hands that mended, stitched, and defied death itself. He recalled the young centurion, now resting, his life hanging by a thread, and felt the paradox of his existence. Wielding no sword, holding no banner, yet determining who lived and who died. The grandeur of Rome, its vast territory and legendary victories, felt distant here, replaced by an intimate truth. True courage was measured not in triumphs carved into marble, but in silent acts performed under flickering candlelight. Every empire would rise and fall. Every general would be celebrated. Yet the work of healers endured in ways unspoken, unrecorded, yet no less vital. The surgeon's trembling hands had held the empire's fragile humanity, and in that act, he carved a quiet, enduring legacy, a testament to resilience, skill, and the invisible battles that shaped the lives of those who would go on to write history with blood, courage, and survival. As the last flicker of candlelight danced across the blood-stained tent, the surgeon rose, shoulders heavy, yet resolute. The battlefield beyond remained a theater of death and glory. But within these four walls, he had faced a different kind of war, one that no general could command, no victory parade could celebrate. He understood now that the true measure of an empire was not in the lands it conquered, nor the battles it won, but in the lives preserved, in the fragile threads of humanity, held together by trembling hands and unwavering courage. The centurion, breathing evenly at last, symbolized the delicate balance of fate and skill, a reminder that even amidst chaos, life could be protected, if only by someone willing to confront fear directly, without hesitation. The surgeon's reflection was quiet, almost mournful, yet tinged with profound pride. For in this small, unremarkable tent, history's most invisible hero had acted, preserving not just a soldier, but the essence of survival itself. He turned his gaze to the distant horizon, imagining the legions marching, unaware of the quiet battles waged in tents like his. And yet, in the trembling of his hands, in the scars that would never fade, lay a truth that would endure far longer than marble arches or banners. Courage is silent, heroism is hidden, and sometimes the most profound victories are those unseen by history, felt only by those who survive.